We meet again for the Daily Bread Bible Study. This is day 345 for Thursday, December 10th, 2020, focusing on the book of Colossians, all 4 chapters. This book of Colossians is a disputed letter of Paul. Now, personally, it shares common elements with other writings of Paul, and so I think they're very closely connected with Paul and the views of his followers. The authorship debate is kind of irrelevant for our purposes here, though I'm still going to reference the writer or the person as the writer instead of Paul directly. Now, the time is kind of funky, depends upon when you want to claim it, but I would say it's definitely after 60 AD. Since it's repetitive on many of the themes of Paul seen in the other letters, this is going to be a short time spent on the familiar sayings of Paul, and I'll focus mainly on the things that I think are different or important. Now, it's written to the saints, brothers, and sisters in Colossae, and the key verse that I'd like to point out for you is Colossians 3:14. Above all, clothe yourselves with love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. Moving on to Colossians 1, the writer reminds the church in Colossae that he prays for them, just as Paul mentioned in the beginning of Philippians. So, we already have one connection with Philippians. How about a second, specifically to Philippians chapter 2, mentioning Epaphroditus? So, the writer mentions Epaphroditus in Philippians 2, but here in Colossians, the name is of a beloved servant, Epaphras. So, Epaphroditus or Epaphras. It sounds kind of similar in their names. Maybe there's some connection, maybe not. But anyways, the writer declares in Colossians 1, verse 9, "We have not ceased praying for you and asking that you may be filled with the knowledge of God's will in all spiritual wisdom and understanding, so that you may lead lives worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing for Him, as you bear fruit in every good work and as you grow in the knowledge of God." The themes of inheritance, reconciliation, and mystery and hiddenness of God are mentioned. All things are created through Christ, it says, even the Gentiles who God's love is sent to, and Paul is speaking towards. So in Colossians 2, unity in love is mentioned. Again, another theme that's common. Deception by those who speak, quote, plausible arguments is addressed. Even the phrase elemental spirits makes a return, which was first mentioned in Galatians. So I invite you to take a moment to compare Ephesians chapter 2, verse 5 with Colossians 2:13. The content seems to parallel each other in Ephesians 2 and Colossians 2. In verse 13, we have the words of Colossians 2, "And when you were dead in trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, God made you alive with Him." Thus, the writer discourages human commands and teachings like those around circumcision. So in Colossians 3, the followers of Christ are invited to set their minds on the things above and to put to death the things of the flesh. This means human distinctions are irrelevant, and in beautiful words for us in Colossians 3:11, "In that renewal there is no longer Greek or slave, circumcised and uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is all and in all. As God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience. Bear with one another, and if anyone has a complaint against another, forgive each other. Just as the Lord has forgiven you, so you must also forgive. And above all, clothe yourself with love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. and let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you were called to the one body, and be thankful. It's important to remember that our connection is something to give thanks for, to be able to be thankful for God's love for us and the ways that we can extend that to one another. It truly is a gift to be in this one body. This love looks like treating others with the same respect you treat Jesus. And then we have a similar version, but a shortened version of Ephesians 5 and 6, with instructions that are similar around wives, husbands, children, fathers, slaves, and masters. So moving on to Colossians chapter 4, this closes with some wisdom, very familiar words that are not surprising, but then also mentions several church workers' names. And so I'd like to close us with focusing on these names. Here we have Tychicus, which was mentioned in Ephesians chapter 6. We have Onesimus and Aristarchus and Demas, which are all mentioned in the book of Philemon. We will have that discussion upcoming soon. Along with Luke, quote, the beloved physician in verse 14. And this Luke is the one connected with the tradition and the Gospel of Luke. This is why people think that the writer of the Gospel of Luke was a physician because of this reference here in Colossians. So, a lot of ways, there are a whole bunch of people who were involved in the ministry of Paul. It is not just one individual who was promoting it, but the idea that a whole bunch of people believed that Gentiles, in fact, could be made right with God through Jesus' death and resurrection, and that circumcision was unnecessary for salvation with God. So may you know that there are no barriers to God's love for you. May you be able to stand fast in the gift of God's love and be willing to imitate God's love through Jesus in the self-giving life for others.